Let me say something that sounds harsh at first, but the more you think about it, the harder it is to ignore. School does not teach people how to build wealth, and I'm not saying that school is useless. Learning how to read, write, understand numbers, communicate clearly, those things definitely do matter. They're foundational skills that make everything else possible. But if you look honestly at the system itself, it becomes clear that the goal of school was never to produce entrepreneurs or wealth builders. The system was designed during a completely different era, a time when economies needed large numbers of reliable workers. Factories were expanding, corporations were growing, industries that were scaling very quickly. Those systems didn't need millions of people experimenting with business ideas. They needed people who could show up on time, follow instructions, and perform specific tasks consistently. So the education system evolved to just support that. Students are trained to complete assignments exactly the way that they're told. They are rewarded for memorizing information and repeating it correctly. They are graded based on how well they follow directions within a structured system. From the perspective of producing dependable workers, that system works extremely well. But from the perspective of teaching someone how wealth is actually created, it leaves huge gaps because building wealth requires a completely different set of skills. It requires understanding how markets work. It requires learning how to sell ideas and products. It requires the ability to take risks without guaranteed outcomes. And it requires learning how to identify problems people are willing to pay to solve. None of those skills, though, appear consistently in traditional education. Just think about that for a moment. Most people spend over a decade in school, let's say 12 years. Some spend even longer with universities and higher education. Entire years of their lives are dedicated to formal education, and during all of that time, very few people are ever taught how money actually moves in the real world. Not theoretically, but practically. They're rarely shown how businesses are structured. They're not taught how to evaluate markets or how to recognize an opportunity. Nobody walks them through how someone identifies a problem, builds a solution, tests whether people will pay for it, and then scales the idea into a functioning operational business. Instead, the focus stays inside of the academic system: grades, tests, assignments, degrees, and on repeat. But the real economy doesn't reward those metrics in the same way. Out in the real world, value is created when someone solves problems that other people care about. A small business owner who understands their customers deeply can earn far more than someone with an advanced economic credentials or a degree, but no practical understanding of markets. And this isn't criticism of education itself. Knowledge matters, learning definitely matters, but the problem is the assumption that formal education automatically translates into financial understanding. And I think that's a disconnect with a lot of our parents today. If you're younger and you don't want to go to college, when our parents were growing up, going to university had a practical return, but the world is changing so fast and so quick. I don't know if anyone relates to that, but that is what I have found, at least when I was going through that phase of my life. That's also why so many adults reach their mid 20s or 30s and suddenly realize that they've never been taught the rules of the financial game they're now expected to play. They know how to complete assignments, they go on discussion boards and then do the threads and all that nonsense. They know how to pass the tests, but they've never been taught how wealth compounds, how leverage works, or how businesses scale. The only model many people have seen is the employment model. You work a job, you receive a salary, you repeat that process for decades. There's nothing wrong with employment itself or working a 9 to 5, but it's only one path within the economic system. And when it's the only path that someone understands, their ability to explore alternatives becomes limited. Entrepreneurs, though, like myself, look at the world a little bit differently through a different lens. We see systems rather than positions within systems. Instead of asking, what job can I get? We ask, what problem could I solve that people would pay for? And that mental shift changes everything. Because once you begin thinking in terms of problems and solutions, opportunities start appearing in places that previously looked ordinary. Every industry contains inefficiencies. Every market contains frustrations and customers that are willing to pay for a fix. But that's the point of starting a business. But recognizing them requires curiosity about how things work, not just compliance with how things are already structured. And unfortunately, curiosity often gets trained out of people in highly rigid education systems. because they are just expected to follow a set of rules. Students quickly learn that the safest strategy is to produce an answer that the teacher expects, not necessarily the answer they're genuinely interested in exploring. And that habit carries forward into adulthood. People become excellent at meeting expectations, but then hesitant to experiment outside of established structures. And experimentation is exactly where many business ideas originate. Some of the most successful companies in the world began as small experiments that initially looked uncertain or even unpractical. The founders, though, they weren't following a syllabus. They were exploring problems that interested them and testing solutions in the real world. What makes the modern moment practically fascinating is that the internet has lowered the cost of experimentation dramatically. What I mean by that is somebody can test a business idea today with tools that cost almost nothing compared to the barriers that entrepreneurs faced decades ago. A simple website could reach customers across the entire globe, and digital products can be created without manufacturing. Services could be delivered remotely, and an audience could be built through content instead of expensive advertising campaigns. These changes mean the path to entrepreneurship has become far more accessible than it once was, yet many people still assume building something is way out of reach. Partly because they were, never shown how it works, so you can't blame everyone. And partly because habits developed during years of formal education make it difficult to operate in environments where there are no clear structures and instructions. But in school, the path is pretty defined. But in entrepreneurship, you create the path. It's like in the game of school, you are following the rules. In entrepreneurship, you're setting the rules. It's that transition feels uncomfortable at first because there's no teacher to tell you what the correct answer is. No grading rubric explaining exactly what success looks like. You just experiment, you try something, you observe what happens, adjust and try again. Over time, patterns will emerge. You begin to understand customers more clearly. You learn which ideas have real potential and which ones don't. You start recognizing opportunities faster because your mind has become trained to look for them. But none of that process happens automatically. It requires stepping outside the mindset that most people were trained in during their years at school. Instead of asking for instructions, you start asking questions. Instead of waiting for certainty, you begin testing possibilities. And instead of assuming someone else has already built everything worth building, you start paying attention to the problems that people complain about every single day. And those complaints are often the first signals of opportunity, but you just have to know to detect them. The education system didn't fail by not teaching this. It just simply wasn't designed for it. Its goal was to prepare people for stability within existing structures. Entrepreneurship operates differently. It's about identifying new structures before they even exist. And once you understand that difference, the world starts looking a little less fixed. Problems begin and turn into possibilities. Industries become landscapes where new ideas can emerge. And the path to building something begins not with permission or credentials or degrees or whatever, but with curiosity about how the system actually works. If this kind of thinking or these types of topics are interesting to you and you want to explore more how businesses work, how opportunities appear, how people build things in the real world, subscribe and stick around. We have so much content that we're going to cover. This is Mind of G. We have honest conversations all the time about a lot of different subjects, whether it be money, personal development, anything like that. There's just so much to break down. I invite you guys to subscribe, stick along for the journey. If you have, 5 or 10 minutes anytime a video of mine goes live, taking the time to listen and learn something new, it might change your life for the better. Appreciate everyone watching, and with that, we will catch you here on the next one.